I've got a question. I was thinking about, with what you were saying, how our morality and patriotism have been hijacked. And, and ever since Constantine established Christianity, Christianity has been hijacked by the state. How do we get it back?
There's a very fine book that I've been reading. I finished it. It's called God and Empire by a man named John Dominic Crossan, Crossan. He's retired now, but he's been a very brilliant scripture scholar, born in Ireland. And he speaks about the brutalizing norm of civilization. The brutalizing norm of civilization. And then talks about how, in his belief, the thrust of Christianity was to offer a radical, nonviolent critique to that brutalizing norm of civilization. And I think whether the appeal would be to Christianity or another faith-based perspective, or to a sense of a community wanting to live according to what it most believes, part of what enables war makers, those that want to hijack our values, to go on is their ability to use fear. And I think that people get goaded into supporting war after war after war, or into not supporting some of the basic fairness that I think would actually make us more secure, because they're told, be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. And then, it encroaches, and I know from Teresa we can learn so much in her experience. And I think of it now, and I could walk out my door in Chicago, and in 15 minutes, Maya would back me up on this because she lived with us in Chicago, in almost any direction except 15 minutes you'd be in the lake in one direction, but you would be at either a military training facility or some kind of a military arsenal. The Illinois National Guard walking distance, the Marine Military Recruitment Center walking distance, Loyola University's ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Community, Corporation, Reserve Officer Training Corps, walking distance. When I walk through the airports, it's customary now to see plenty of people in camouflage outfits, to see guards with large guns. I think that we are seeing, for instance, when Hurricane Katrina hit, mercenaries from Blackwater were called in immediately, and the CNN coverage made it seem as if the only people who could really make a difference following that natural disaster were the militarized people. Why are people beginning to be so accepting of a rising military presence in our country? I think we're constantly told, be afraid. We're not told to be afraid of the inevitable terror that next generations will face, which is what we're doing to our own environment. Global warming, depletion of fossil fuels, the degradation of the environment, couple that with the weapon proliferation, and what chance are future generations going to have? I mean, I think really one of the greatest fears that probably, in honesty, hits us almost like an ice cube in the gut is the fear of the possibility that our grandchildren, grandchildren, might someday look back and say, did my grandparents not care? What if there's enough history left for them to know that even though we knew, you open up the Guardian today, you know, environmentally, we're creating a crash landing because we're depleting the fossil fuels and because we're not saying to the scientists, develop alternative sources of energy, redesign our way of living, our lifestyle. I mean, this is the kind of thing that simply has to be happening now. And it could be very creative, it could be very productive and life-giving. But it's almost as though we're mesmerized. We're sitting on our hands, we're saying, no, we're not going to give up our cars. We're not going to give up our plane travel. We're not going to give up our electricity. We're not. We love our grandchildren. We're not going to do a thing for them. That's scary, isn't it? that they might look back on us as a cruel and a selfish generation who just thought, well, it's all about us. And we hope maybe, you know, there will be enough guns for you so you can protect whatever you can amass for yourself. I think sometimes the adults are encouraged, I'm going to speak from the United States perspective, to act like big children. Go to the soccer games, go to the play dates, go and shop till you drop, buy some more stuff for the kids, stuff the closets, stuff the SUVs, drive, and it's all for the kids. Every soccer game, every piano lesson, every play date, the kids, you know, they don't even know how to ride their bicycles anymore in Chicago. It doesn't make any sense, you know, this idea of the helicopter parent who's always, and I think the government in the United States is not unhappy if a consumer society sees its choice making invested in, you know, which shampoo am I going to buy, and which toy will I buy for my child, and how did my child do in the soccer court, and yet we're not providing for the children in terms of a future that would be survivable. And maybe that's speaking with too much apocalyptic talk. Maybe technology will bail us out. I hope so. But it does seem to me that the changes that we could make in our lifestyles still seem so elusive. And I speak with my own guilt. I flew here, I'm flying to Sweden, I'm flying to Oman, and I'm flying back to Chicago. At some point, when am I going to clip my wings, huh? So I know, I know of my guilt, believe me. But I do see some hope, though. In the United States, 30 students staged a sit-in in their cafeteria. They didn't want the military recruiters in that cafeteria. They were expelled, and there was such a ruckus all across the United States that 3 days ago the principal had to change his mind and bring those kids back into the school. They're the heroes now. You see a lot of young people rejecting car culture completely. And you know, the last time we moved the Voices office 2 blocks away, we moved it with bicycles. It was amazing. You know, they've got all these ways to haul things, and the recycling is happening apace. And so there are hopes.
I don't know whether this is really a question for you, but what's preoccupied me is we are supposed to be a democracy, so is America such a good democracy that we want the Iraqis to have it? Now, the majority of people in this country apparently are against the war and against the troops being there, and I think the majority in America. We are supposed as a democracy to be able to change our government and change our leaders, and we've got people at the top there who don't want to be moved, and we haven't been able to move them. Have you got any solutions?
And it means we are not a democracy. Full stop.
Full stop.
And it is quite easy if you examine the powers which our top people have. You know very well we haven't got a democracy. And we used to have one, but it has been gradually eroded. And people have done nothing about it. And that is our crime. We should have prevented it. And like you quite rightly said, people are continually kept afraid. As I said, when I was 7 years old and Hitler came into power in Germany, Germany was a proper democracy. The Weimar Republic was 100% democracy. It took Hitler about 4 years to destroy it. And it was all through fear. In those days, there was Stalin already. They knew all about what was going on by the communists, how people were killed all the time and so on. So the fear was communism. And so the people were kept afraid all the time. And Hitler needed a new power for this, a new power for that. Just like we are experiencing here. And finally, when the wonderful Reichstag, the parliament went up in flames in Berlin, again, that was a communist. And that gave Hitler his final enabling power. And democracy was dead. And afterwards, the German people were just as helpless as we are. They had no power left. The press was not allowed to tell people what was going on about concentration camps or what you and so forth. So within 12 years, and it lasted only 12 years, which in history isn't much at all. when you look at the terrible things that happened, the Holocaust and everything, was made possible because democracy was destroyed and the people became helpless. I keep on and on about this when I talk to young people here. I said, look, we haven't got a democracy anymore because look at the power that Brown has got. He might as well be Henry VIII. He's got the same power. He can declare war, anything, without asking Parliament.
And one thing, Teresa, I would interject is that at the moment, the risks of nonviolent resistance are not that great. I think this is what surprises me, that people may face much greater risks if we don't exercise the freedoms we have right now. I think we're at a juncture where we might lose those freedoms if we don't exercise them. But right now, if you exercise, I mean, I come to you straight from the Polk County Jail, and it was a very, we go into the offices of elected representatives and also to people aspiring as presidential candidates, and we open up a file, and in the file are the names of Iraqis who've been killed and the names of U.S. people who've been killed, and we just start to check. Ahmed Mustafa, 3 years old, we remember you. Sergeant First Class Ryan Clancy, 21 years old, we remember you. Louis Mustafa, 29 years old, we will not forget you. Sergeant First Class Janice Rodriguez, 31 years old, we remember you. It's a long, long list. Now, you know, we're generally arrested after some hours. For me, it was the most educational year of my life I'd had since I was 5 years old and learned how to read. I learned Spanish, now I want to learn Arabic. I think a little longer I'll do this time. It's terrible in the United States because of the onerous length of sentence imposed on prisoners. And I dream of a jackhammer, going to the corners of these prisons. I take them all down. But I don't want to communicate that it's a high risk, given the risks we face if we don't take action. But I think that it's very easy for elected representatives to look out the windows from their offices and see vigils and see even, the Stop the War campaign big marches and say, well, they'll all have their big day and then they'll go back home and continue to pay for it. What they want from the United States people, for most of us, it's not our bodies, it's not our assent, it's our money. I haven't paid a dime of taxes since 1980. I can't give them a dime. I'd give it to the mafia sooner than I'd give it to this crew with their nuclear weapons, with their FBI tactics, with the CIA, with the torture, with Guantanamo, with the war after war after I wouldn't dream of giving them money. So, okay, like I said, I'm odd. But I do think that there could be a chance to swell our movements, to grow our movements more or less, grassroots, if we started to kind of wake up each morning asking ourselves, what can I do today to stop this war? I mean, there are people in our societies who are waking up each day more or less asking themselves, what am I going to do to facilitate the war? Maybe they don't say it just like that, but they're working for these major corporations or in some tangential way, maybe teaching at a university that's got a big research grant from a defense company, maybe working in some form of governance, maybe public relations. So we have a responsibility that I think could be exercised more emphatically, I guess. And it's really what the State Department wants to impose on the regime. That's very helpful, thank you. I must say the word looter also is one that jars me, because you know, people talk about the looters in Iraq, or they talk about the looters in Hurricane Katrina, but if you want to talk about looters, I referred to them earlier in this talk, these major corporations that are just, and what more they would have done to Iraqis in passing the oil law had they been able to. But that's one encouraging sign that the Iraqi elected officials said no, managed to come together on that. And there may be some, I mean, I veer more toward anarchism than nationalism, but I don't want to see Iraq split apart into fragments. And maybe there's something good when people say, wait a minute, we're Iraqis, we aren't going to be so swindled by these major oil corporations that want to pass an oil law that would take our resources and hand them over to them when, you know, we're burying our children at the rates of hundreds of thousands. And an itchiness to try out their newest weapons, which is what's very disturbing with regard to Iran. You know, the specialists are sitting there with this prize thing and they want to see, does it work? And also certainly the permanence of those bases. And the biggest embassy in the world is being constructed in Baghdad. It's a little bit behind schedule now, but compared to other things, it's one of the things that, you know, was actually given a great deal of attention. But no Iraqi, unless they have extremely high security clearances, can go inside that embassy. So all the people who are trying to flee, if they have any question of compensation or of getting papers or getting a new passport, because the United States discounted all the passports that they formerly had, they can't go anywhere near the U.S. Embassy, and there's only one office with 2 machines in all of Iraq cranking out this new passport, which is like gold. People need it if they're ever going to be able to travel. And then, if they want to talk to anybody from the United States, they have to go outside of Iraq, along some of the most dangerous roads in the world, hope that the Jordanians will open their border, which doesn't always happen, then get into Jordan and pay $100 per person in their family. If you're like my friend Rami with her 5 children, $600 she has to have to be able to go to the U.S. Embassy and plead her case that of course she paid a ransom to release Rami. They had a cell phone inside the room where he was being tortured so that she was hearing what was happening to her son. Of course they paid it. And then they're told, well, you're disqualified. You gave money to insurgents. And she has to pay $600 to hear that. And then if she goes back again, another $600, and be able to go through online, the very sophisticated process. My heart was in my throat as I was trying to fill out an application for a young girl online. I thought I might, mess this up. You have to be like a lawyer. And, and the UN office is and the U.S. Embassy, they're way out in the wealthy neighborhoods. So people who don't have money for taxi fare, there's so much that's kind of set up to humiliate and frustrate people. And they've come with terrific traumatic stress, like perpetual traumatic stress disorder, you might speak of. And to my mind, it's edifying, very edifying that they haven't exploded, that you're not seeing riots, that people are somehow managing to make it through and raise their children when they can't send them to schools. Up until this year, for the first time, Jordan schools could be opened up to the Iraqi children. So people have their children home all day. They're afraid to go outside and even take the kids to play, because what if an Iraqi policeman, a Jordanian policeman stopped the father and said, let me see your papers? And they've all overstayed their visas, they're all illegal. And no income. And I admire much of what the United Nations has done. But for some reason, the combination of the United Nations and CARE decided the thing to do for Iraqi women would be to invite them to come to cooking classes. I thought these women would just fall down on the floor. They were so flummoxed by that. Or they invite people to come to a soup kitchen in a fancy hotel that's 3 neighborhoods away. The problem solving has been nowhere near adequate. And again, we could be building bonds of friendship. We have it within our wherewithal. We could be beloved all over the world.
I wonder what you think about truth as the first casualty of war, because all these fascinating facts about humiliation can be found out quite easily, but people just don't choose to find that sort of news today. I mean, at work, it's quite common to find someone who says, well, those people wouldn't be in Guantanamo Bay for nothing, you know. Whereas actually they are there for nothing. They've been paid to shock some non-existent guilty person who ends up in Guantanamo. And we all know that it's an illegal, cruel detention centre. But it's really, truth as a casualty. That on the 17th of October, Clinton, the ex-president, made the point that civil liberties are being denied and squashed for the first time ever by the American government. And this is, an important person to draw attention to that, although I don't think it was in the news a lot. And so Bush's statement was, this government does not indulge in torture. So it's really like me coming here and saying, well, I haven't been to Eastbourne much, but I know for a fact it's not on the seaside, it's miles from the coast, 50 miles from the coast, and everyone sort of laughs in disbelief, you're denying the facts, but somehow Bush got away with that, we do not perpetrate torture. Because I suppose technically Guantanamo isn't in the US or all this sort of legalistic stuff, but obviously it's happening with the full blessing of the US government, and if everyone really through whatever legal, peaceful means, got in touch with their elected representatives quite a lot, an awful lot, then it would be something like the poll tax didn't happen, did it, in its original form. It can happen, but people really have to, as you say, I'm not saying I do it myself particularly, but I try, people really have to go for it, don't they? Just like the military really goes for war,
Can I just add to that? Because I think the distinction you made between democracy and freedom is very important. Our friend here was asking that question because I don't really think we do. We live in a less than democratic country because of the powers that you've referred to, and the people aren't equal in terms of their influence. That some people are much more influential than others, but we are still in a relatively free society, and we've got to use the opportunities that are available, like the press, like the media, like the sort of actions that you were talking about, in order to try and widen the circles. So I think that's a very helpful distinction between democracy and freedom. We have to use freedom. We can try and use democratic means, but I don't have a great deal of faith in that being successful means of doing it.
Those 5 pissed off plowshares people. Yep. Because there's another sequel to that story. The United States wanted to send over bunker busters. And we should all be concerned about those, because now they're retrofitting these missiles right outside of my city in Chicago. There's a factory getting possibly nuclear-tipped bunker busters ready to go to Iran. But anyway, they wanted to give the Israelis bunker busters, 600-pound ones, and their plan was to land at Shannon Airport and refuel. And the Irish government, because of that trial, because of these 5 activists who, look like, the stereotypical motley crew, the Irish government had to say, no, you can't land here. And so the U.S. Department of Defense said, well, go to Scotland. The Scotch were out in force. They, for some reason, they went near Fastlane or something. And anyway, the Scotch were out saying, nay, and they couldn't land them there. So then they were really, getting nervous. They found an old abandoned airfield, I think in Suffolk County here, and they landed a couple of planes there, and then they managed to route them through Dubai. But this was just 5 people who had a disproportionate influence relative to their numbers. And these plane spotters, in terms of putting rendition on the map, I've seen that happen. A number of us then went down to a place in North Carolina, Smithfield, North Carolina, where we figured out, because of the plane spotters, that there was an airstrip and the planes were taking off from there, and that there was a whole front company, aero company, to do these rendition flights. And we were maybe 15 people that got arrested, but in the course of our trial, it came out that the president of the company, aero company, was the governor of North Carolina, and the vice president was the secretary of the Treasury. And so they dropped the charges against us immediately. But, you know, it's easy, I think, given our numbers, if we're thoughtful and concerted and we develop our actions and we keep our groups sturdy and, you know, keep trying to build them. But, you know, maybe it's already happening here. Forgive me, because I don't know. But I remember when we were working on Central American concerns in Chicago, it was just a given that every Wednesday night you were at your local meeting for the Central America Affinity Group, and then the next Wednesday, a few would be representing the local group at the Chicago citywide group, and we had many, many, many demonstrations. We were in and out of the courts regularly. We were going back and forth to Central America. We all learned Spanish. This warfare has cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. It's jeopardizing security for, you know, vast populations and maybe our own population. So I think the idea of upping the level of risk that we take and the level of commitment. You're not going to have a death squad at your door or a massacre at your village or any of the horrendous things that do happen to other people who don't have the level of risk-free, relatively risk-free freedom that we have now. But I think that you're so right, sir, about the truth being the first casualty, because, you know, we hear of all kinds of other things that, you know, that are supposed to grab our attention, this sports, this, and entertainment, that. And of course, you know, we joke in the United States that the national religion has become shopping. And, you know, the orgy of it will, you know, be starting up now, getting ready for Christmas. So I think it's true that people aren't always told the truth. I want to especially recommend www.democracynow.org. It's a very great website for a radio TV reporting, a woman named Amy Goodman who's just become a national heroine in the United States. She's superb at presenting the news. That's democracynow.org. It's a daily on the weekdays.
It's actually from Iraq, who the government wants to return to Iraq, saying it's a safe place to return to, and they would rather be destitute in this country, and they are destitute because they've been refused. They have no benefits at all, and this project is working to support them, really. And there are many people from Iraq who are being sent back at this very moment.
Thinking about what you were saying earlier about fear and how people are encouraged by governments to be afraid, and that's how they get away with wars. We're here, I think both in America and Britain now, we're sort of being told very similar things now about Iran, as we were told about Iraq, 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm just wondering how much people in America are aware of the fact that they're being lied to, basically, and how much resistance there is to the idea of any possible attack on Iran.
But the question is, how much of a resistance is there to a possible attack on Iran, and how much awareness do people in the United States have of the lies that are being told again with regard to the threat that Iran might pose? The polls are troublesome. The last one that I read said that 52% of the U.S. people would favor attacks against Iran. In the United States, you find that people are very vulnerable to a kind of cartoonized version of foreign policy. Tell us who are the good guys, who are the bad guys. And I don't know, this is just conjecture on my part, but I did test it out with some of my family members. They knew who Ahmadinejad was, but they couldn't find Iran on the map. So you can see the demonizing is already starting up. You know, who is Ahmadinejad? Well, he's a bad guy. What do you do? Plop him. And I think that, you know, the precedent in 1998 when the Desert Fox bombing happened was one in which there were 4 days of very sustained severe bombardments of Iraq, and then it went out of the news. And it's disconcerting that the military has that in their set of precedents, because there may even be some military that think that they could do that, just hit Iran with 4 days of severe airstrikes, and then they wouldn't have to think about it any more than they thought they would have to think about Iraq. The possible repercussions, I mean, Iranians certainly should not have to just sit there and take it, and yet you can imagine if they retaliate in any way, what could come in a second wave of United States or Israeli attacks against Iran. So it's certainly very, very worrisome. There are generals in the United States that are speaking out vigorously, and retired generals saying that this is stretching the United States too far, that the United States can't handle it. And of course, there are some who would suggest that the prices of oil and gas would rise so high that it would be a terrible thing, given that the economy isn't doing so red hot anyway right now, and really we're borrowing from China to pay for the war that we're waging at this point and putting those debts on the grandchildren. So again, I'm quoting Milrai, but the way Milan put it was that he'd say it's below 50% for a possibility that a war would happen, but the variable that could boost it suddenly very high is that you've got some very reckless and irresponsible people with their fingers very close to the buttons that start these wars in the White House. So to whatever extent that people in your country could restrain the United States, whether through your military or your government or your public opinion or your church leadership or your people on the streets, that would certainly be a huge favor to the world. And as far as what would happen in the United States, it took a long time to build up awareness about Iraq that went beyond the cartoonized good guys, bad guys, only one person lives in Iraq, Saddam Hussein. And a lot of it was done, again, by people with an impact disproportionate to their numbers. I mean, Voices was and still is housed in the United States in a 3-bedroom apartment, and like I said, we embezzled from my dad's Social Security and pension check to run the thing. I mean, we were never a strong, muscular group. But because this sturdy, small group consistently sent delegations that returned hitting the ground running, some of the larger groups then started to come on board. And that was, I think, maybe the most important thing that we did. And then eventually, of course, CPT, which had much more strength and were more seasoned, came in with the Iraq peace team. So I think that it's possible that small, determined groups can have a rippling influence and might also, especially in these very, very dangerous times, bring more people in. It's that circle of people willing to do what Angie's been doing. You know, she knows we have to be out of here by 3 o'clock, so she was back there fixing up the dishes. And those of you who are out at the hospital demonstration all morning and still come to this meeting, the people that are making the flyers and activating the email lists and distributing information to the media, all of those tasks that sometimes can seem a bit burdensome, when they're shared together and communities grow, that to me is a great hope in our peace movement. It doesn't mean we shouldn't look for new creative means, but I think the means that have been tried and true, I think about the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the union movement, the women's suffragist movement, the movement to abolish slavery. These have all been small groups of determined people who used outreach and education and pulled more people in and dedicated their lives. There's something very good about that.